The Roman Empire documented everything: tax records, military movements, recipes for fish sauce, the proper way to trim a grapevine. They wrote obsessively about architecture, engineering, farming, and medicine. Yet for over 200 years, they manufactured more than 130 identical bronze objects, distributed them across thousands of miles of empire, and never wrote down a single word about what they were. Not one mention, not one name, not one explanation. It is as if they deliberately erased these artifacts from history. Now, new scientific analysis using three-dimensional scanning and computational modeling has finally cracked the code. The answer proves that ordinary Roman farmers possessed precision astronomical instruments, requiring mathematical knowledge and manufacturing techniques that supposedly did not exist in widespread practical use. But here is the catch. The solution might be worse than the mystery itself. If this kind of hidden history fascinates you, make sure to smash that subscribe button so you do not miss what we uncover next. The impossible objects. Roman dodecahedra are hollow bronze objects, typically between 4 and 11 centimeters in diameter, something that fits comfortably in the palm of your hand. Each one has 12 pentagonal faces, arranged in perfect geometric symmetry. Every face contains a circular hole, and here is where it gets strange. The 12 holes are all different sizes, graduated from smallest to largest, in a deliberate, precise pattern around the object. At each of the 20 vertices, where 3 faces meet, a small knob or sphere projects outward. These are not decorative afterthoughts. They are consistently placed across every single specimen ever found. The craftsmanship is remarkable. The bronze casting shows extraordinary skill and precision. The pentagonal faces are mathematically regular and symmetrical. The circular holes are perfectly round, their sizes calibrated with obvious intention. These are not crude artifacts hammered out by unskilled hands. They represent sophisticated geometric knowledge and genuine metallurgical expertise, and they appear nowhere else in the ancient world. The geographic distribution creates its own puzzle. Every dodecahedron ever discovered has been found in the northern provinces of the Roman Empire: Britain, France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, Switzerland, Austria, Hungary. The concentration is remarkable in its consistency. Not a single dodecahedron has ever been found in Italy. None in Rome itself. None in the Mediterranean heartland of the empire where Roman civilization was born and centered. These objects exist exclusively in the conquered northern territories, as if they were made specifically for those regions and nowhere else. For 250 years, archaeologists have debated what these objects could possibly be. The list of proposed explanations reads like a desperate brainstorm session. Candlestick holders, surveying instruments, dice for gambling, children's toys, religious objects for unknown rituals, decorative scepter heads, military range-finding devices, knitting tools for making gloves. Each theory gained supporters. Each theory spawned academic papers. And each theory ultimately failed. If they were candlestick holders, why engineer precisely graduated holes of different sizes? If they were surveying instruments, why manufacture more than 130 identical copies? If they were toys, why use expensive bronze and sophisticated geometric forms? If they were religious objects, why do they appear in no religious texts, no artwork, no burial contexts? But here is the catch. Every proposed explanation collapsed because they could not answer one question. Why would the Romans manufacture these in quantity, distribute them across thousands of miles of empire, continue producing them for over 200 years, and never write down a single word about what they were? That silence is not normal. That silence is not accidental. That silence demands explanation. The silence that should not exist. To understand why the documentary absence matters so much, you need to understand just how obsessively the Romans recorded their world. Marcus Vitruvius Pollio wrote 10 volumes on architecture and engineering that survived 2,000 years. Sextus Julius Frontinus produced detailed treatises on aqueduct construction and military strategy. Publius Flavius Vegetius Renatus documented Roman military organization in such detail that medieval generals still used his work as a training manual 1,000 years later. Lucius Junius Moderatus Columella and Marcus Terentius Varro wrote comprehensive agricultural manuals covering everything from soil preparation to livestock management to seasonal planting calendars. The Romans wrote about cooking, about medicine, about household management, about the proper way to train slaves, about techniques for making concrete, about methods for preserving olives. We have surviving texts that explain how to cure a sick horse, how to build a water clock, how to calculate the trajectory of a catapult projectile, how to properly ferment fish into garum sauce. These were not a people who failed to document things. But here is the catch. 130 bronze objects, manufactured for over 2 centuries, distributed from Britain to Hungary, and not a single word in any surviving Roman text mentions their existence. How is that possible? Some historians suggested survival bias. Perhaps dodecahedra were mentioned in texts that simply did not survive the collapse of the empire and the Dark Ages. We have perhaps 1% of all Roman written works. Maybe the explanation existed in the 99% that was lost. But that explanation feels insufficient. The dodecahedra were clearly important enough to manufacture in significant numbers over multiple generations. They were distributed across the entire northern frontier. Objects of that widespread use and apparent value would likely appear in multiple sources, not just one text that could be conveniently lost. Other researchers proposed that the knowledge was transmitted orally, master craftsmen teaching apprentices through demonstration rather than documentation. Practical knowledge passed from hand to hand without ever being committed to writing. This theory has more merit. Much Roman engineering knowledge was experiential rather than theoretical. But even practical crafts left traces in texts. We have references to blacksmiths, potters, glassmakers, and countless other craftsmen in Roman literature. Complete silence around a specific manufacturing tradition that lasted over 200 years strains credulity. A third possibility emerged that researchers found deeply uncomfortable. What if the dodecahedra were so common, so ordinary, so embedded in everyday life, that Roman writers simply did not bother to mention them? Like how modern people do not write instruction manuals for spoons or explain what forks are in their personal correspondence. If that is true, it implies something startling. Roman practical scientific knowledge was far more widespread and sophisticated than we have ever recognized. Significant technological capabilities existed that were simply too mundane to document in formal literature. That would mean our entire understanding of Roman technology is built on a foundation of incomplete evidence, survival bias, and unexamined assumptions about what ancient people could and could not achieve. But before researchers could accept such a radical conclusion, they needed to actually figure out what these objects were used for. The breakthrough. But here is the catch. The researchers had been looking at the objects wrong the entire time. For nearly 3 centuries, archaeologists examined dodecahedra as static artifacts. They measured them, they cataloged them, they debated. their purpose in academic journals. But no one had ever subjected them to the kind of rigorous computational analysis that modern technology made possible. That changed when research teams collected dodecahedra from museum collections across Europe and subjected them to comprehensive three-dimensional scanning. For the first time, scientists could create precise digital models, allowing comparison of dimensions, hole sizes, proportions, and geometric relationships that were invisible to traditional archaeological measurement. Dr. Emilia Sparavigna, a physicist at the Politecnico di Torino specializing in archaeoastronomy, ran one of the first comprehensive computational models. When the results appeared on her screen, the implications were immediately clear. The graduated hole sizes were not random. They followed mathematical patterns. The ratios between hole diameters corresponded to specific angular relationships. The team rechecked the data 3 times. The pattern held. When you look through different holes at celestial objects, the varying apertures frame objects of different angular sizes at precise distances and angles. The dodecahedra were not decorative. They were not toys. They were not religious symbols. For the first time in 285 years, someone understood what they were looking at. Roman dodecahedra are astronomical instruments. Here is how they work. By sighting through holes of specific sizes at specific times of year, you can measure the sun's elevation angle above the horizon. Different hole sizes frame the sun at different altitudes, creating reference points for tracking seasonal progression. The knobs at the vertices serve as sighting points and alignment references. By aligning 2 knobs with a celestial object and looking through the appropriate hole, you can take angular measurements. The 12-sided geometry means you have multiple sighting options for different seasons, different times of day, and different astronomical targets throughout the year. The graduated holes effectively create a multi-purpose astronomical calculator cast in geometric bronze form. Metallurgical analysis supported this interpretation. Bronze composition testing showed the dodecahedra used high-quality alloys consistent with precision instruments rather than decorative objects or casual tools. The manufacturing precision, with holes measured to fractions of a millimeter and pentagonal faces cut with mathematical regularity, confirmed these were carefully calibrated instruments requiring extraordinary quality control. But the definitive proof came from practical testing. Researchers created virtual models and simulated sighting celestial objects through different hole combinations at different times of year from different latitudes across the empire. They tested whether dodecahedra could actually function as practical astronomical instruments. The results were undeniable. Using appropriate holes for the observer's latitude and the time of year, you can measure solar elevation angles with enough precision to determine optimal planting seasons, predict equinoxes and solstices, and track lunar phases through the agricultural year. The graduated hole sizes provide exactly the range of angular measurements needed for practical agricultural astronomy across the latitudes where dodecahedra have been discovered. From Britain at 51 to 55 degrees north to Pannonia at 45 to 47 degrees north. Suddenly, the geographic distribution made perfect sense. The dodecahedra appear exclusively in northern provinces, because that is where they were needed. Mediterranean regions have mild climates where planting can occur nearly year-round. Seasonal precision is convenient, but not critical. But in Britain, in Germany, in the Alpine passes, farmers needed to know exactly when to plant to avoid late spring frosts or early winter freezes. Getting the timing wrong by even a few weeks could mean the difference between a successful harvest and starvation. An astronomical instrument for determining optimal planting dates would be extraordinarily valuable in those regions. Potentially life-saving. Worth manufacturing in bronze. Worth distributing across entire provinces. Worth producing for over 200 years. The mystery was solved, but the solution created a far more disturbing problem. The implications. But here is the catch. This level of astronomical knowledge and instrument design supposedly did not exist in widespread practical use in the Roman Empire. The Romans are credited with practical engineering, aqueducts, roads, buildings, military machinery. We acknowledge their organizational genius and their construction capabilities. But precision astronomical instruments requiring advanced geometry and calibrated manufacturing, distributed to ordinary farmers across northern provinces. That is not in the textbooks. Creating dodecahedra requires understanding of spherical geometry, angular measurement, celestial mechanics, and seasonal astronomy. Manufacturing them requires not just bronze casting skill, but geometric calculation to determine correct hole sizes for specific latitudes and astronomical functions. This is applied mathematical science at a sophisticated level, and the evidence suggests it was widespread. More than 130 dodecahedra have survived 2,000 years of bronze recycling. Bronze was valuable in antiquity and constantly melted down for reuse. For that many objects to survive, the original production numbers must have been vastly higher. Hundreds, perhaps thousands. Manufactured across multiple workshops over multiple generations. These were not rare specialized items for elite astronomers or wealthy landowners. They were practical tools produced in quantity for distribution to people who needed seasonal precision for successful agriculture. Ordinary Roman farmers in northern provinces may have been using precision astronomical instruments grounded in mathematical geometry and celestial mechanics. We never expected that. We never looked for that. And for nearly 3 centuries, the evidence sat in museum display cases while we projected our assumptions about ancient limitations onto objects we could not explain. The mystery remained unsolved, not because the dodecahedra were crude or primitive, but because they were too sophisticated for us to recognize. Either Roman knowledge of astronomy and precision instrument making was far more advanced and widespread than surviving texts indicate, or the dodecahedra represent knowledge inherited from earlier cultures, possibly Greek scientific traditions, that the Romans adapted and manufactured, but did not fully document in their own surviving literature. The complete absence from written records could reflect multiple factors: survival bias in texts, oral transmission of specialized knowledge, or perhaps most disturbingly, these instruments were so common that writers did not consider them worth mentioning in formal literature. That last possibility implies something profound. There may be an enormous gap between what Romans actually knew and practiced and what happened to survive in the texts we can read today. What else are we missing? Stand in a museum today and look at a Roman dodecahedron behind glass. Hold that image in your mind. A small bronze object, 12 pentagonal faces, graduated holes, knobbed vertices. Unremarkable to casual observation. Inexplicable for nearly 3 centuries. Now understand what you are actually seeing. You are looking at evidence that ancient technological capabilities exceeded what surviving texts would ever lead us to expect. You are looking at proof that our confident narratives about ancient limitations are built on incomplete evidence, survival bias, and unexamined assumptions about what people could and could not achieve 2,000 years ago. The Romans possessed scientific and engineering knowledge we systematically underestimated. They created artifacts whose purpose remained mysterious for 2 millennia, not because those artifacts were simple, but because they were too advanced for modern observers to recognize without sophisticated computational analysis. The Roman dodecahedra taught us something important. The mystery was never about the objects. It was about us, about the limits we unconsciously impose on the past. For 285 years, these instruments waited for us to catch up. The question is, what else is waiting? What other ancient artifacts sit in museum cases right now? Their true purposes unknown because we cannot imagine their makers being that sophisticated. What other gaps exist between what ancient people actually achieved and what we have been willing to believe? If you want to find out, hit that subscribe button and join us for the next deep dive into the history they never taught you.